Security at Policy Exchange. For those of you who don't know, Policy Exchange is one of the UK's leading educational charities focused on developing actionable recommendations on government policy and ways to improve and achieve British prosperity. We're thrilled to have folks join us today on a very distinguished panel. We have Dr. Ellen Whitehead, Labour critic for the Green New Deal and energy. We have Clare Jackson, President of Hydrogen UK, and David Cairns, the VP, Public and Political Affairs at Equinor. When we had started planning this event a few months ago, we asked ourselves the question of what would happen if Vladimir Putin would cut off natural gas to Europe. Today we know that answer, and that means the worst energy crisis Europe has faced in 50 years, one that could get much worse this winter. We also know that it's not just an energy crisis, much more acutely, it's a fossil fuel crisis. After years of hearing criticism that wind and renewables are too expensive for us to bear as an economy, we now have wind energy operating at 1/9 the cost of natural gas-fired generation. This is an opportunity and a moment for us to reorient the future of British energy, and that's what we're here to discuss today. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge Clare and Hydrogen UK for sponsoring this panel. As folks are no doubt well aware, the green transition has been a key part of the Labour conference. You couldn't attend every one of the fringe events focused on this sector if you tried. Earlier, just a few minutes ago, the leader of the Labour Party here asked us a question, why not have the UK be the economy that champions and seizes the hydrogen sector for the future? And Claire, I'd like to start with you, and if you could tell us, is there anything stopping us from seizing the opportunities that your organization and others have outlined for us?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question, right? I think one of the things that sort of really struck me the sort of last few days is just the amount of enthusiasm there is for hydrogen, which I guess as Hydrogen UK, as the industry body, is incredibly encouraging. I think, what Alex just sort of outlined there, we're in a sort of changing environment, an ever-changing environment. And I think that's never more true in the energy sector, and particularly within the hydrogen sector. It moves incredibly quickly. We have someone at Hydrogen UK whose job it is to try and keep track of everything that's happening in the hydrogen industry. And honestly, it's impossible. I'm going to probably have to pay for his therapy. It's a very, very difficult job to do. But I guess I just wanted to sort of start off and sort of open this up by talking a little bit around that sort of theme of change. And I want to give you sort of one thing that hasn't changed, one thing that has changed, and one thing that has to change when it comes to sort of hydrogen. And so the one thing that hasn't changed, despite everything, is net zero. We still have to hit net zero. Hydrogen is still an absolutely essential component of hitting net zero. And I think, one of the sort of things, and there's been a few sort of hydrogen-related panels that have happened this week, and I just want to make sure one thing is really, really clear. Hydrogen is not the answer to everything. Net zero is an incredibly difficult challenge. It's probably the hardest challenge that our generation has ever had to face, and it's had to face many, many generations. And we need every technology to play its part. In fact, we probably need every technology to play the maximum of its part if we're actually going to be able to deliver net zero. So we have to get away from this conversation about either or. It is and hydrogen is a really critical part of that. There are parts of our energy system that we cannot decarbonize without hydrogen, and that remains the truth regardless of the external changes that are happening right now. Which kind of leads me very nicely onto the thing that has changed. And that is the international geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in. And I want to sort of talk about that from sort of two angles. The first is that, it is very clear that we are in an energy security crisis. And the response to that, if we want to have an energy security in the future, we have to be deploying more domestic renewable generation. And the reality is that that's actually not really possible without also deploying hydrogen alongside that. We are already, I think last year we paid I think £500 million on curtailment costs for our existing renewables, and that is going up year on year on year. And it's not just about the cost that's associated with that, it's also about the energy that we are currently wasting. you know, that's enough energy to power 500,000 homes. That's just the energy that we're wasting through that curtailment. If we want to be continuing to deploy renewables, increasing our domestic generation, we have to be deploying hydrogen alongside that. And the second is that particularly in the hydrogen space, things are moving very, very quickly internationally. So the UK is in a great position to emerge as a global leader, if not the global leader, but a global leader. I don't think there will be just one global leader in hydrogen, but a global leader in the hydrogen space. We have some of the most exciting projects. We have some really great sort of policies that have been developed over the last couple of years. But the rest of the world is catching up, and it's catching up incredibly quickly. You know, the announcements in the US around the, I always want to call it the IRA, but that's got an interesting an acronym there, the Inflation Reduction Act, is going to make the US a really attractive place to invest in hydrogen. Similarly, many of the announcements that are coming out of the EU, the recently announced hydrogen bank, with you know, several billion attached to funding hydrogen projects there. EU is increasingly a very attractive place to do hydrogen. And we are in an international race. There is huge competition for that investment. We want to see that come to the UK. And we want to see that investment that is currently earmarked for the UK stay in the UK and not go elsewhere. So what must change is, at the moment, as I said, we have some of the most exciting projects in the world that are happening right here in the UK. But the reality is those projects at the moment have not yet reached a final investment decision. 99% of the hydrogen production capacity that is in the UK pipeline has not yet reached that final investment decision. That is absolutely imperative that we do that as quickly as possible so that we can stay ahead of the curve. I loved what Keir Starmer said. You know, there will be one country that will be the first to harness the power of hydrogen. Why not us? But that will only happen if we move from projects on paper to actually space in the ground and delivery, which means that we need to get those business models working, we need to get that energy bill through, and we need a government that's actually prepared to back an industry that's ready to deliver.
Dr. Whitehead, Claire's laid out a few things that have changed and need to change. Something that's clearly changed, as we can tell by the speeches, is the Labour Party itself. It's undergone a very deep transformation from where it was 3 years ago, and a very clear difference and an offer for the future. One of the visions articulated by the leader was Great British Energy, an opportunity and a new leadership for the state in developing the future of this country. Nevertheless, we I think all recognize the need for private investment to continue playing a role. How will a Labour government ensure that that confidence exists for a private sector capital to make sure that they stay in the UK and build a clean future for us?
Well, I mean, let's look at the overall commitments that we've now got from this conference, which, by the way, I mean, I've been attending this conference, I think, since 1976. I've been a Member of Parliament for 25 years now, and I can honestly say that in all that time, this is the conference at which we have got the greenest, cleanest, clearest, most clearly funded, most clearly worked out commitment to the green energy economy of the future of any time I've been at these conferences. And so we can, I think we can pretty seriously say now that actually Labour is the Green Party as far as the future is concerned, because not only are we articulating what we need to achieve in the end, we're articulating very much what we need to do, how we need to do it, when we need to do it by, and how it is going to be funded and managed. And I put the commitment on green power by 2030, i.e. a complete system run on green power, whereas at the moment we have 44% or so of power developed by renewables as at the heart of that move forward. Now, what that means, among other things, is that we have not just got to do what we have said we would do in terms of quadrupling offshore going to 60 gigawatts or something like that of installed offshore, doubling onshore, taking the brakes that are off on onshore wind and really driving that forward, doubling our solar, particularly solar field capacity over the period. But we've also got very urgently to start investing in new renewables that are actually not in the picture because the Conservatives particularly have set them aside, haven't supported them, haven't brought them through, so that they can't at the moment play a role in that renewable energy mix. And among those things is tidal range. That one of the things that we'll be investing in very substantially in terms of getting to that renewable power target, and I'm coming to the answer to your question in a moment, is tidal range to deliver a firm power energy future based on the fact that as far as tidal range is concerned, you don't just build one lagoon in one particular place, you actually build them in different phases of the tide so that you've actually got constant green power for 120 years, 24/7 around the clock. Now, that particular technology has, unlike those other technologies, not had a ready stream of investment going into it. And it is precisely that kind of technology that Great British Energy, as we heard announced today, is one of the vehicles to get that really going, that to bring forward plans to develop those in partnership with the private sector, with investors who want to come into those sort of deals, knowing that Great British Energy is anchoring that and making sure it can move forward. So I think this particular way of doing things as far as bringing renewables and low carbon energy forward in the future is actually really investor friendly as far as the future is concerned, because you will not have a competitor for your investment vehicles in this particular field. You will have a partner and an instigator which you as the private investor will want to follow along with. And after all, that's the model that actually takes place in a number of countries. Denmark got Ørsted, Vattenfall, Norway, Ørsted, Vattenfall, Denmark, countries that actually use that as a joint investment vehicle for what they want to do in terms of their own renewable ambitions. The other thing I'd say, which I would sort of do a slight caution on, is that we will of course not, by getting our power 100% renewable by 2030, we'll be some of the way there, but not all the way there by any means, because among other things, the power sector is only responsible for 20% of the energy we actually use. Most of the rest of it's in heat and similar activities. And those are the things we've got to decarbonise at a very rapid rate as well. And so there are further choices ahead of us in terms of how hydrogen is going to work, what parts of the economy hydrogen is going to penetrate. Clearly hydrogen has to penetrate the parts of the economy where electricity is not easily able to get that in. But indeed, we've actually got to look in that other 80% of the economy, how that can be electrified and what that means in terms of the future generation we're putting forward, in addition to what we are proposing by 2030, but also whether there are things such as green gas, hydrogen, obviously things relating to the decarbonisation of industry using carbon capture and storage. All those things we've actually got to add to the end of that green power achievement by 2030 if we really are going to get us forward to our wholesale green low carbon power system for the future. So there are There are not just the tasks of getting renewables forward to the 2030 line on a longer term basis, and that I think also addresses, Chair, that to your question. There are going to be enormous opportunities for private public sector partnership investments in all these things that are going to bring that future. And very finally, the cleanest, greenest, most reliable energy that you can actually possibly produce is the energy that you don't use. And one of the things that we've got to do, or one of the many things we've got to do, is actually bring demand side and energy reduction as a partner in that green energy step forward. And that means things such as the Labour plan for the retrofit of 19 million homes, which among other things would reduce the energy use in those homes by about 20–30%, in addition to all the other benefits that retrofit produces. So having a systematic demand side arrangement for energy efficiency, mentioned already the extent to which we're wasting energy at the moment by constraining a lot of it in the system, because we can't use it through the way the grid system is managed at the moment, the way our energy markets work. We've got to sweep that away and make sure that that is all used as efficiently as possible on a demand side basis in order to complete the revolution. And that, by the way, means a lot of investment on grid strengthening and new grid capacity to make sure that the constraints are a thing of the past. And that, by the way, is an absolutely clear vehicle for public-private partnership investment in getting those grids fit for the renewable systems of the future. I'm sorry, Chair, that went on a bit long, but
Not at all.
I'm really rather excited by today's stuff and what it means, and so I hope you will forgive me for going on a bit.
Absolutely. David, the Tories have had a plan for decarbonizing the power grid by 2035. Labour's come out with a plan for 2030. Everyone agrees for further decarbonizations down the line. What does that vision mean for a company like Equinor, and what does it mean for the 300,000 Britons that currently work in the oil and gas sector today?
Yeah, so afternoon, everybody. Just to start by saying, so for those of you who don't know what Equinor is, so we are a Norwegian company. We're Norway's largest company, and we are an energy company. And so why is Equinor sitting in Liverpool today? And the answer to that is actually the UK is one of our closest partners. You know, we have been supplying oil and gas to the UK for the last 40 years, and we supply about a third of the UK's needs on those two products. And in recent years, we've become ever more of an investor in the UK. And the great story is this sort of shared heritage of the North Sea. And what we see is that partnership working for a lot of these new industries of the future. So if you take offshore wind, for example, we built the world's first floating offshore wind here in the UK in Scotland. In storing carbon dioxide that Alan mentioned, actually Norway is ahead of this, where we now have contracts for companies to be able to send their CO2 for storage under the North Sea. But we see that the UK and Norway between them have the capacity to store most of continental Europe's CO2 emissions on a commercial basis. And that's a fantastic opportunity. And thirdly, as we talked about from Clare, on hydrogen and so on, the UK actually is one of the world's leaders in its ambitions on hydrogen. And its practical approach to different types of hydrogen, whether it's made from wind and electricity, or whether it's made from gas, makes also the UK a very, very attractive place to invest in. So we really see the UK as a great partner for those industries of future. And then to come to your question, Alex, this is what we have shared in terms of the history is North Sea doing big steel at sea, doing stuff underground, 2 miles underground from drilling oil and gas. And a lot of those skills are really relevant. So within my own company, we have many, many people who started their life as a geology engineer doing oil, is now working on our team for storing CO2. We have engineers who started doing that who are now doing work for building Dogger Bank, the world's largest offshore wind farm here in the UK. So those skills are transferable, and people want to move in that industry. But we say, trying to quite clearly, so outside this room and in public, that this is a transition over time. It's not a switch today, and people who have skills want to move to these new things, and that will take time. So being able to have low carbon oil and gas production, which is gradually shrinking, and at the same time renewables and low carbon energies such as hydrogen, which are growing, is a good seamless way to keep people in the industry and also to bring new talent into it.
Thank you, David. Claire, to you. On the topic of investment, there's been a strong representation of labor, organized labor on some of the panels on the green economy, and they pointed out a difficult truth for our sector, which is that early on there was a promise made that transitioning to wind and solar would be a job creator, would revitalize their communities. In truth, we found that while the UK is now a leader in offshore wind, those jobs were never really created in the UK. A lot of those parts were assembled abroad and imported here at much cheaper rates of labor. What can the government do? What could a next Labour government do to ensure that the next generation of renewable technologies like fuel cells and electrolyzers, are actually made, assembled here and generating jobs for Britons?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there will be millions of jobs created in the hydrogen sector somewhere in the world, and we want to see as many of those created in the UK as possible. I think you're absolutely right. The UK has sometimes been more of a leader in technology deployment than it has in technology development. And I think, we want to change that in the sort of hydrogen space. I'd say there's a few things that we can do to make sure that the workforce is UK based. I think the first sort of David's talked about there is around what can we do to help our existing workforce that are in adjacent sectors that need to transition. How can we support them to transition into the sort of hydrogen sector? The second, I think, is around how can we make sure that we have a workforce that is ready to go in the UK? This is about getting kids into STEM and making sure that that funnel of workers who are able to work in this sector and to deliver net zero is there, which means we need to make sure that we're making these sectors really attractive to work in. And I think, net zero and hydrogen and the excitement and the buzz around that is really, really helpful. But we need to be working with people who are developing curriculums. We don't call them that anymore, specifications, I think we call them now. And making sure that we're getting the workforce through. And I think the third is, do we need to be investing in our UK-based technology developers who are working in this space as well, and working with them to support them to become global leaders, so we're not just developing technology just for the UK, but we're developing technology that can then be exported as well.
Thank you, Claire. We'd like to take a moment to let audience questions, if anyone have anything to ask. Fella in the back with the bright blue tie.
Thanks, and thank you, Dr. Whitehead, for talking about the energy efficiency measures that Labour are proposing. It's really good to hear. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One about the costs of hydrogen for home heating. So some people may have seen there was a report yesterday from Cornwall Insight saying that the costs of pure hydrogen for home heating just make it unviable for home heating. Blended hydrogen may be an option, but by the time we get to producing the blue hydrogen, by the time the carbon capture and storage is available, the green hydrogen will be at cost parity with blue hydrogen anyway. So I guess my two questions are, what's your view on hydrogen for home heating? And Claire, you mentioned that there was a role for hydrogen in all sectors of the economy. Shouldn't we be deploying it in sectors that can't be electrified first, and moving for heat pumps and energy efficiency in home heating? And the other question is, why are we pursuing blue hydrogen if green hydrogen by 2030 will be at cost parity with blue hydrogen anyway?
Shall I sort of take that first one, and then perhaps, David, you could take the second one? So the cost around hydrogen is something that we get asked all the time. And the reality is that getting the future price of hydrogen, getting the future price of any energy at the moment is hugely challenging. And there's lots of different views out there as to where hydrogen could get to. there's one report by Bloomberg that says that hydrogen could be at sort of cost parity with natural gas by 2030, if you account for the cost of carbon. So there's various different views on what the future cost of hydrogen will be. The reality is even the projections of the cost of hydrogen are coming down year on year on year. If anyone has sort of guessed what offshore wind could be delivered at what cost, 10 years ago, you never probably would have said what we have today. So I think the cost of hydrogen will probably have that very steep cost down curve. The second thing that I would say on hydrogen in heat is that there's sort of three components of that cost. One is the cost of the hydrogen itself. The other is the cost of the appliance that you have to put in, and the other is the system cost. And so it's important that actually you look at that holistic view of cost, and you don't just look at the cost of hydrogen, which is one component, but you also look at those other two. And when you look at that holistic viewpoint, the reality is that the most cost-effective way is most likely to be a mixture of technologies. It's not just that hydrogen will be more cost-effective in some homes than a heat pump. It will be less cost-effective, will be ultimately a mix. So my view is deploy heat pumps, sure, and energy efficiency as fast as is humanly possible. I think I don't think any of us would argue that it's really important that we're doing that. But we're also going to need hydrogen to play a role. And so we need to be pushing forwards with the villages, the towns, the neighbourhoods to ensure that hydrogen can start to bear some of that weight as well. I think I think that's probably everything on that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, so I work for a company that invests both in blue and in green hydrogen, and we think they both have a role. So just to give some sense of scale and why that's so currently in the UK, about 100,000 tonnes of hydrogen a year are produced, which doesn't sound very much, but if you wanted to produce that from renewables, you'd have to convert all of the UK's wind production to produce that hydrogen. And yet we're talking about growing a hydrogen economy massively in the coming years. And so we see one of the reasons that why we're investing in the Humber, which is the UK's largest industrial cluster, and about half of the UK's industrial emissions, is that is a sort of geographical location where you have a lot of very big users of power. And the blue hydrogen solution allows you to decarbonize that use much more quickly and at volume. Again, just to give an example, we with SSE have just bought a power station in Hull, in Saltend, called Triton. That's a 1.3 gigawatt power station. If we were to convert that to entirely green hydrogen, then the offshore wind farm that we're building off the northeast coast of England called Dogger Bank, which is 3.6 gigawatts of wind, we would have to build that, and then we'd have to build another one to use that electricity to create green hydrogen to power the power station. So we absolutely see in the future that both have a role, and as the UK's offshore wind in particular projects grow, you're going to see more and more of that in the economy. But in the meantime, over the next decade or maybe 2 decades, the UK wants to get on and decarbonise sectors as quickly as it can, and blue hydrogen has a really important role and good role to play in that.
Can I just say one other thing on blue hydrogen? I think the emissions aspect gets talked about quite a lot, and I think one of the most important things that the UK has done in the last sort of couple of years is to introduce a low carbon hydrogen standard, which means that we're no longer really talking about blue, green, whatever. We're talking about whether it meets that emission standard, which means that whatever hydrogen comes into your pipes or comes into your homes or your cars or whatever in the future, you can be sure that that hydrogen is genuinely low carbon. And that's a really important thing that's happened in the UK.
Thank you. Questions? Up front?
Thank you. I represent civil engineering contractors, and I guess one thing that's really one thing that's really important to civil engineers right now is the fact that these technologies are evolving and changing and getting more efficient every day, every year. I guess how can the infrastructure projects that obviously are a necessity to be built in the UK, how can we, as a nation, ensure that we're going to get value for money when the technologies may be advancing so fast, before we can build the infrastructure?
Okay.
Yeah, you go.
So just to start with a slightly different answer to that question. So if you go around the world and you look at oil and gas projects, and you listen to the voices and the accents you hear are Texan, Scottish, and Norwegian largely. And that is a sort of a legacy of these great industries that have become global, and they've managed to spread those skills around the world. What we hope for in the development of the hydrogen economy is exactly the same, that you will have, you know, accents from Newcastle or Liverpool, wherever it is, around the world being global leaders as well. In the meantime, as you say, we are trying to step up and create some new industries that don't exist yet, but they need to. So again, come back to for example, our projects in the Humber, we work with the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield, which has a Fit for Net Zero program, trying to get as much of the UK supply-based industry involved in some of these industries of the future, so they can be part of it. And that's not the only solution, but trying to work with those communities of industries to get them involved to help become leaders is a must-do really for the UK in this.
Could I just briefly come in on the what I think is one of the underlying implications of that question is that what we're going to have to do in terms of the both the power and the heat revolution that's underway at the moment is actually get away from this arrangement that we've had so far, which is that infrastructure and enabling investment follows the development of the actual thing rather than precedes it. And although that looks like at the time good value for money, in practice it always turns out to be bad value for money in the long term, because what happens is that you actually do not have the infrastructure in place as fast as what it is you're trying to get across investing in also takes place, and that after a little while starts to be a drag on that investment. To give you one example, which everyone thought was a great idea, well, not everyone, I didn't, but a number of people thought was a great idea when we were in the earlier stages of the adoption of offshore wind in the UK. And a regime was put in place which was that every wind farm would be responsible for its own cabling to land, and every wind farm would have to have a landing point and a conversion station, and then power would go off to the grid. As a result of which, we have got a crisscross pattern in the North Sea of cabling which is not appropriate to the challenges that we're going to have in putting 60 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea, because no one ever put any sort of anticipatory cabling and infrastructure in which could actually, for example, jointly collect the power from those wind farms and land them at a much smaller number of places, much more efficiently, with also known connections while that process was taking place. So actually we are in a position where with our ambitions on 60 gigawatts, we are going to have to completely recapitulate on how that system works and build new anticipatory offshore paving cable paths to actually deliver on that thing. And if we'd done it right in the first place, we'd be a lot further ahead than we are at the moment. And one of the things that I think is really important about the British Energy announcement that we had, the Great British Energy announcement we had today, is it actually allies the potential value for money in the future, which will be gained by that anticipatory investment becoming real and reaping the benefits of that investment once it's in, when we know that investment in the long term is going to make money, is going to be good for us in a variety of ways, but that we enable the, as it were, the power of public enterprise to ally with private enterprise to actually bring the wherewithal to bear on the success of those private investments in our future green energy markets. And I think it is crucial that we get that infrastructure right over the next period, and that's one of the vehicles that we're going to have to do it through.
Doctor, you had pointed out infrastructure alignment is really one of the optimal places where government can lead, and I think people across the spectrum would agree on that. One of the areas, and forgive me, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but has a hypothetical Labour government thought about where they would lead on export opportunities to Europe? We have, a few months ago, Germany and Canada signed an agreement to explore exporting hydrogen from Canada's east coast all the way to Germany. Britain, being a lot closer, might be a bit cheaper to do it. What do you think about opportunities for export with the continent and elsewise, and how would a Labour government seize those opportunities?
Well, export can be done by a variety of ways. I mean, one thing that could be very important in terms of our future carbon capture and storage arrangements is that we've actually got the facilities which can actually gather, either by barging or pipe, carbon from not just the UK but across the North Sea, the North Sea basin, so that we've got an arrangement which actually is much greater than our own carbon capture and storage facility. And indeed, the Acorn project in Scotland at the moment is aiming to provide precisely that, so that we've got the equivalent of an export industry in carbon capture and storage for the future. Obviously, as far as our green energy is concerned, then one of the futures lies in actually getting our interconnectors into a much better position than they are at the moment, including immediate interconnectors, which I've mentioned the sort of pathway that we need to produce in the North Sea to anticipate a lot of that additional wind investment. Well, that pathway can be in the form of a combination of what are interconnectors and nodes in those interconnectors to facilitate the input of energy at that point, whereby it can be either imported into the UK or exported elsewhere across Europe, depending on circumstances. So you've got a combination of, as it were, your collection points and your marketing points all in one go, based on what the balance of energy is in coming into the UK. And at the moment, although our interconnector fleet is developing quite well, we don't have those sort of multi-purpose interconnectors in place, which could actually really be the basis for both imports and exports of that energy we're producing. So there are a number of examples of that in how we develop our energy infrastructure, so that it doesn't just apply to internally to the UK, that actually we can be not just an international marketer of particular technology, but actually a physical marketer of the products that we are producing and bringing forward. It's really important, as we've already said in the meeting so far, that actually we do grasp, exactly as Keir said, why can't we be the first nation to do this and that? It's really important that we grasp those technologies and use them to export our knowledge and understanding and fabrication and so on, but to actually be able to export our products as well at the same time in the design of the systems as we get them together.
Clare, David, do you see any particular competitive advantages the UK has in its green economy of the future that will create export opportunities? Where do you think we'll be strongest in? And in turn, do you see any areas where we need to look at other economies for imports and technology transfers to help develop and catch up if that's the case?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the exports conversation is a really interesting one. I guess from a sort of molecule perspective, because obviously you can export technology and skills and expertise, and you can also export hydrogen. I think the hydrogen one is a very interesting one. I mean, I think when Europe changed its target from 40 gigawatts worth of hydrogen to 80 gigawatts worth of hydrogen by 2030 this year, and recognizing that half of that, so 40 gigawatts worth, they needed to import by 2030. I'm not going to lie, they've got their eye on our hydrogen. It's a very attractive prospect for them. You know, they are looking elsewhere as well, but you know, our hydrogen looks very attractive to them. And I think one of the things that we have to think about in the UK is we're going to need an absolute ton of hydrogen to decarbonise both by 2030 and also by 2050. So we're going to need an awful lot of hydrogen domestically. But then there is also this really interesting and exciting export opportunity. And regardless of what that looks like in the future, it doesn't actually change what we need to do now, which is start that production as quickly as possible. And let's see how far we can get. You know, we've got those 10 gigawatt targets by 2030, which I would say is probably set in about the right place. But, you know, let's see if we can smash it. Let's see if we can not just meet it, but smash it. And then that export conversation becomes a little bit more interesting. And I think that second one around exporting of expertise, gosh, that's a mouthful, and technology, I think that's also another one which is really interesting. You know, hydrogen is not a technology. It's a whole range of different technologies. The UK will not be the global leader in every area of that, but there are some areas where I would say that we are ahead internationally. I'm slightly fearful to start naming too many of them, given that my membership sort of spans an awful lot of those. But there's certainly areas where the UK is moving faster than other economies. I would say that the CCUS angle is one where the UK is taking a slightly different angle to a lot of the rest of sort of neighbouring countries. I say heat is another one where the UK is ahead of the game and is pushing forwards. There are a number of others. Again, I'm not going to sit here and list them all necessarily, but there's certainly some areas where we are ahead and where we have a competitive advantage and where we could eventually become an exporter. David?
I just want to really strongly agree with Alan on the opportunities for CCUS and imports of the CCUS and therefore services export. So as we have seen with our Northern Lights project in Norway, once companies have an opportunity to sign a contract to store the CO2 instead of paying a carbon tax, they will take it and they're storing it. And so it's a real business case of, you know, build it and they will come. If you're sitting in Germany at the moment, which is obviously Europe's largest economy, largest industrial base, they have nowhere on land to store this CO2. And so that CO2 storage as a concept is about as popular there as fracking is in the UK. But actually the solution for them is the UK and Norway's North Sea. And if we can provide that, that's a fantastic opportunity for us in terms of services exports and creating that business.
Questions from the floor? Gentleman in the back.
Hi, Di Richards from Hitachi Energy. Just really welcome a lot of the comments you were making, Alan, about the offshore network in the North Sea and the need for anticipatory investment. Just made me think that one of the challenges historically to that anticipatory investment has been sort of Ofgem's role and the way that they work with investors. Any thoughts on how Ofgem would work with Great British Energy, or other thoughts on perhaps changing their mandate to be stronger on delivering net zero more quickly? And maybe a supplementary question that I must thank you for all your knowledge and expertise of the energy system, and given what you said at the start, that we're now in a position of having a real sort of plan for green energy, what would it take for you to change your mind and stay on as Energy Minister?
There isn't a question of me changing my mind because, as you may have seen this afternoon at the beginning of Keir's speech, the person who is going to be standing for my seat at the next election was the person who introduced Keir Starmer this afternoon. And she will be a brilliant MP for Southampton, by the way, for the future. But that doesn't mean I'm about to quit the field. And I have no intention of retiring full stop. And I will hope to be very active in this field for a long time to come. The only difference is that I won't actually have constituency surgeries. So you know, let's take that as we find it. I think this question of anticipatory investment and how the, as it were, the government becomes a positive partner in that step forward, rather than a ring holder in the process, which is what has happened at most over quite a period of time, is, I think, very important in the coming period. And I mean, for example, what you've mentioned this North Sea pathway, which is going to require a great amount of investment by National Grid. It'll require a lot of partnership investment with other people, but that's also the case on land as well. And what really quite dismays me is that we've got an energy bill. Well, we did have an energy bill, sorry, that's in front of us. I ought to say to everybody here, that's a bit of a sort of an in comment, in as much as we have an energy bill which actually is, or should, produce a large amount of the plumbing for the renewable systems that we're going to have in the future. And our new business secretary, can we remember who he is? Oh, it's that, yes. Nice Mr. Mogg, Rees Mogg, has decided to pull the energy bill from its process through Parliament at the moment, with no sign that it's coming back in a hurry, no sign of what it's going to look like, and indeed the possibility under those circumstances of us losing perhaps 5 years in the development process of actually getting all that infrastructure and all the protocols and the legislation in place which actually makes the green energy revolution actually work in the long time. So I'm in the curious position as an opposition politician in begging the government to produce its own piece of legislation as quickly as possible so that we can get on with things. And I think it is a potentially catastrophic move that the government has made at this particular moment. But one thing which does worry me, I mean, I think the bill generally is a pretty good thing in terms of the renewable energy revolution. But one thing in there is that the government has said that they're going to replicate the backward-looking investment arrangements for onshore infrastructure in the same way as they had it for offshore. And they are citing how much money was saved, I don't know from where, on the offshore arrangements as a reason for doing that onshore. And just at a time when we absolutely need to move ahead as quickly as possible with all that infrastructure, both onshore and offshore, to get that moving. And the way that needs to work is, as I have said, precisely by something like British Energy taking the lead and saying, right, we are going to be an investor or lead investor in this. Let's have some partners along, and we'll have the competition in doing that in the procurement, not at the point where you start off thinking what kind of system you're going to put in. And unless we do it that sort of way, we are going to lose years, decades even, in terms of getting in place the structures that actually, I mean, not to put too fine a point in it, take us from the old brown energy distribution system where we had a number of power stations on the spine of the country delivering our systems outward, to a new system where what you might say are our new coalfields, which is the offshore wind and various other things like that. The energy sources are actually properly served by the energy systems around them, and we have no time to lose in making that happen.
Thank you, folks. And please, if you could identify yourselves and your organization with your questions. Thank you. Gentleman in the back with the turquoise.
Thanks. Obviously, I've asked a question, but I wanted to ask a follow-up. I'm Jamie from MCS Charitable Foundation. We work on renewable energy policy. On the hydrogen for home heating question, part of the problem, I appreciate what you say, Claire, about the taking into account the different stages of the delivery of hydrogen. But hydrogen has about a third of the calorific value of gas, so it's, just as a basic fact, less efficient than gas is going to be. So once you couple that with the high production costs of green hydrogen, because as the other speaker mentioned, you need a lot of renewables to produce the amount of green hydrogen that we're going to need, because it's just an inefficient process. That leads me to conclude, and other analysts to conclude, that the hydrogen costs for home heating are not going to come down relative to gas or relative to other sources such as heat pumps. And there is a risk that with the government consulting on hydrogen for home heating in 2026, which is after the Future Home Standard comes in, that there will be a loophole that will allow developers to say, we'll put in hydrogen-ready boilers from 2025 and we'll be building homes that will have gas boilers by another name, rather than the energy-efficient heat pumps that will be helping to save people on their fuel bills. On the blue hydrogen point, I appreciate that there is that you are investing in green hydrogen, but blue hydrogen doesn't exist at the moment because we don't have the carbon capture and storage, and it's not going to exist at the scale needed in the imminent future. The track record of CCS globally shows that it's had a very poor record, and it's only delivering a fraction of the percentage of what's needed, and a fraction of the percentage of the IPCC targets. So I would sort of cast some skepticism on the idea that we are going to have blue hydrogen at the scale that's needed. Green hydrogen, yes, has a role in industry and in transport, but that's got to be a strategic use, and it's not going to be rolled out across all sectors.
I think that the first part of the question about the energy density of hydrogen, it reminds me of the intermittency question of wind. We'd asked 10 years ago, folks would say, well, wind is only blowing once in a while and it's not reliable elsewise and it's going to be more expensive for that. Now it's saving us tens of billions a year from what we would be having dependent on on natural gas. What do you see as a technology evolution that can address some of these concerns?
I mean, I guess to your point, which I think the concern is basically coming from that people won't deploy heat pumps because they're waiting for hydrogen. I mean, that's the nux of the nux. That's the kernel of what you're trying to say here. And I think, you know, I would agree with you that hydrogen's not a reason not to deploy heat pumps where heat pumps make sense. I think we should start with those properties which where heat pumps make the most sense and where they're easiest to deploy. That makes sense to me. But hydrogen's not a reason not to deploy heat pumps. But I still stand by my belief that heat pumps can't do everything. And actually a mixed approach that includes some hydrogen and includes some heat pumps. There will be some homes for which hydrogen is more cost effective, and there will be some homes for which heat pumps are more cost effective. And the system costs of a balanced approach of using both will ultimately result in a better value for money for the consumer. But I totally agree with your point that hydrogen is not a reason not to deploy heat pumps. And we can, you know, sit down and discuss the analytical and the costs and all of those things at another time. I'd love to have that conversation with you. But yeah, agree. Heat pumps, we love heat pumps. Let's deploy them.
And just on the other points, I mean, I just have to disagree with your analysis for two reasons. One is, if you take storing CO2, you know, Norway has 20 plus years of experience of doing exactly that in Sleipner and Snøhvit. And in terms of lead times for some of these projects, you know, they are aligned with the UK government's plans for deploying both CCUS and hydrogen in this coming decade. It's not coming online tomorrow, but it's going to be coming online in the 20s.
And can I just very briefly sort of try and put this argument somewhat to bed in terms of what we've already heard is that what we are going to need in terms of the green energy revolution is to throw everything at it from all directions with a combined effect that actually gets us to that net zero target. And what we know is that there will be very different horses for different courses under different circumstances in different parts of the country for different applications. And as a general point, we can say, yes, hydrogen should be used where electricity can't reach. Now, that is itself quite a contested view, because what is it that that electricity can't really reach? There's some things we know, for example, for major large road transport, it's extremely unlikely, to the point of nothing, that we are going to have trucks driving around our road with batteries on the back of them twice as big as the goods they're carrying in order to electrify them. So that's the circumstances under which we need hydrogen, under those circumstances. Trains. But there will also be a number of circumstances, off-grid, for example, in our country at the moment, where the gas grid doesn't reach, where you can see a hydrogen village or a hydrogen town developing. Indeed, circumstances where, for example, you've got substantial input of district heating, whereby actually a really quite efficient method of fueling that district heating network could well be by hydrogen, so that you've actually got the hydrogen using the heating for people's homes, but you haven't got that question of changing boilers or whatever, because the system is already there to make it work. I personally doubt very much whether the government will take any sort of decision in 2026 which says we are going to convert the whole country to heating by hydrogen. I think that's extremely unlikely, and I think well before then we'll have got much better into the idea that actually we have to put horses for courses in the right places, in the right order to make that work. And by the way, finally, the blue-green hydrogen agenda is just changing before our eyes, because blue hydrogen is now ludicrously uneconomic in terms of the gas that comes from it. Now, that doesn't mean also that blue hydrogen doesn't have some role at some stage. I mean, I also personally think my worry about blue hydrogen coming forward is that actually you've got to invest in the plant to produce blue hydrogen, and absolutely right, in order for it to be blue hydrogen, you've got to have the CCS on the end of it before you start. Otherwise, all you've got is grey hydrogen, with a sort of possibility that something else might happen. So the concern, I think, would be that the investment that's necessary to produce the blue hydrogen starts to swamp out the green hydrogen that can follow it. Because you would say, from the point of view of a non-stranded asset, well, we've got to run this over the period of life of the investment that we put into the blue hydrogen, and therefore we won't develop the green hydrogen on the back of it. And that's another reason why I think you need something like Great British Energy, because that would, among other things, be in many instances, the catalyst for developing that green hydrogen at a much earlier stage than would have otherwise been possible, in order to make sure that the transition from blue to green is as quick as possible, and that green is the one that we go for in the long term.
Excellent. I think we have time for one last final question right quickly. And we have front row.
A technical question. In terms of CCS then, I've read various reports from well-established financial institutions have said. Sorry, I should have introduced myself. Yeah, I'm David Landon from Maltex Energy. But I was interested really just to a slightly technical question on, does carbon or CCS work? Because I've read some reports from financial institutions that say the technology is a long way away. Even earlier today, there was quite a debate about it in one of the conferences, so it sort of works. David, you're saying you've got it working in Norway. So, can you shed any light on that disparity of views about it?
So our experience, as I say, we are a Norwegian company, and we have been doing this for 20 years in Norway. And as I said, so the business of storing CO2 for emitters is now a business. So this project called Northern Lights, which I mentioned, that store is being drilled today, and the geology essentially of storing CO2 is the same geology of storing oil, storing gas. It's the same basic premise. If you pump it down 2 miles under the seabed, in a safe place, it's going to stay there, and it's going to stay there for a long time. So our experience of both sides of that say that actually you can do this in that way, and you can do it safely, and you can give guarantees to companies that want to store in that way. That's the foundation of the business. So there are reports of other parts of the world where it has not been run properly. But I think, as Claire said earlier on, any hydrogen that is produced blue hydrogen that's produced using CO2, if that CO2 storage is not up to scratch and the emissions from that blue hydrogen don't match UK standard, then it won't count and it won't be able to be used. So I think that the government is thinking through these systems to make sure there are guarantees that, as Alan said, the hydrogen isn't grey, that it is low carbon hydrogen. That's what we all aim for.
Excellent. Folks, thank you so very much for participating. We're all out of time now. We hope you enjoyed the rest of the panels, and we really appreciate you joining us here today. Thank you so much for our panelists and Hydrogen UK in particular.